There was only one person in Hollywood who could really make Charles Bronson lose his mind with anger. It wasn't another action star. Someone else didn't like his works. It was someone who made fun of his biggest fear while shooting The Dirty Dozen. The director thought it was a joke, but Bronson will never forget how he was made to feel. He was so angry that he was still talking about getting payback 30 years later. The worst feud in Hollywood is finally out in the open. Charles Bronson wasn't meant to be well known. He was born in a very poor coal mine town in Pennsylvania as Charles Dennis Bukinski. He was the 11th of 15 children. His parents came to America from Lithuania and had to make a living. They didn't have enough money to buy him proper clothes, so when he was only 6, he had to wear his sister's dress to school. Back then, he only spoke Russian and Lithuanian. This made him feel like he didn't belong in his own country. He really was as tough and quiet as he seems in his movies. He had to become that person to stay alive. When his father died, things got worse. He was only 10 years old. He went straight to work in the coal mines while other kids played or went to school. It was hard, dangerous, dark, and stifling to do the work. He dragged coal through small caves for 12 hours a day for only $1 a ton. He never gave up, though. He dug and pushed and even gave up his own clothes to help his younger brothers. He was the first person in his family to finish high school, even with all of that going on. When he was 21, he saw an opportunity to get out of the mines and join the Army Air Forces during World War II. He was in real danger as a shooter on a B-29 bomber that flew missions over Japan. He got hurt on one trip and was given a Purple Heart. But he thought things were better, even though he was at war. He once said, "I never had it so good. I was getting enough to eat and sleep, and this was a nice change from home." Later, people questioned his service, but his records were real, and Bronson had been there. He had a bunch of different jobs after the war until he got hired by a small theater company to paint scenery. At first, he wasn't supposed to act, but something about him really clicked when he stood near the stage and started taking on small roles. He wasn't loud or flashy, but there was something about him that made people want to be around him. Soon, he was living in a small apartment in New York with Jack Klugman, another struggling actor. In 1949, he packed his things and moved to Hollywood, determined to make it as an actor. When Charles Bronson first came to Hollywood in 1950, his face showed that he had been through a lot. It was rough, wet, and shaped by a hard childhood. In the casting process, they didn't see a star, they saw strength. A faceless stone made for bad guys, thugs, and goons. Roles with no names or lines, just a punch to throw or a bullet to take. His real name wasn't Charles Bronson yet. It was Charles Bukinski. During the McCarthy-era Red Scare, he knew that name sounded foreign, so he changed it to Bronson by borrowing it from the Bronson Gate at Paramount Studios. It was a small change that helped him stay alive in a town that wanted all of its stars to look, talk, and sound the same. In the early 1950s, Bronson worked non-stop, appearing in movie after movie. That's the kind of background bad guys and nameless soldiers that you forget about as soon as they leave the screen. He was invisible even when he was standing next to stars. He didn't smile or talk much, but his presence was always there. His eyes said, "You don't know me yet, but you will." That moment finally came in 1954 with Drumbeat Hat, a western starring Alan Ladd. Bronson played Captain Jack, a mountain man who fought against the U.S. government. The story was based on real events, but Bronson didn't just play the part, he became that man. He didn't need to say much. His face showed anger, pride, and fire. One reviewer said he stole the whole movie. That wasn't just a compliment, it was a warning shot. Bronson was done being thug number 2. That scene in the jail cell near the end showed a side of him that Hollywood had ignored for too long, a sense of humor, a human edge, and a natural rhythm that no one saw coming. Drumbeat Hat gave him a seat at the grown-up table, and that's when people started to pay attention. 4 years later, Bronson got something even bigger, his name at the top of the cover. Machine Gun Kelly wasn't a high-budget movie. It was made quickly and cheaply, but Bronson made it unforgettable by playing gangster George Kelly like he was haunted by his own fame. His cruel girlfriend, Susan Cabot, was strong on the outside but scared on the inside. The two of them created a lot of tension, and there's a scene in the bank robbery where Bronson's body language and cold stare did all the talking. Critics didn't just like it, they were shocked. People began to whisper that maybe, just maybe, this guy could carry a movie, but Hollywood didn't listen, not yet. Even with all the attention, Bronson stayed in the background. He had a TV show called Man with a Camera and kept getting good supporting roles in big movies like The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape, and The Dirty Dozen. By the time he was in his 40s, most actors would have given up on becoming famous, but Bronson wasn't one to give up. While American studios didn't see him, European directors saw a hero in him. In France, Italy, and Germany, he was cool, quiet, and strong. They loved his stare and silence. People in other countries saw him as a star before people in his own country did. It wasn't easy. Hollywood didn't know what to do with him for years because he was too ethnic, too rough, and not pretty enough. He once joked that he looked like a boomed rock quarry. That's why producers kept casting him as Native Americans, Mexicans, Greeks, Italians, and anyone else who looked foreign. But when director John Sturges gave him the part of Bernard O'Reilly in The Magnificent Seven, things started to change. He was 39 years old, which is older than most breakout actors, but this role gave him something new. He played a gunman with a conscience, someone who knew that real courage wasn't just about guns. In one scene, he told the boys in the village that the real heroes were their fathers, who worked the land every day with no pay in sight. That quiet power stuck with people, especially in Europe, where the movie was a huge hit. It not only launched his international career, but it also showed that Bronson could be more than just a tough guy. 3 years later, The Great Escape gave him another chance to show that he wasn't just a tough guy. He played Danny, a soldier who was afraid of being around people who had to dig tunnels for a daring prison break. The fear in Bronson's eyes wasn't acting. As a child, he worked in coal mines after his father died and knew what it was like to be trapped underground. That raw fear gave the role weight, and director John Sturges chose him to show that even the toughest guy could be weak. The result was unforgettable, especially in Europe, where Bronson was already a quiet star. But as his fame grew, his personal life started to fall apart. He fell in love with Jill Ireland while filming The Great Escape, but she was married to his friend and co-star David McClum. Bronson didn't try to hide how he felt. He did something shocking while he was still grieving the death of his mother and living with the end of his marriage. Bronson and Ireland got married in 1968 and stayed together for over 20 years. She was not only his wife, but also his co-star in more than a dozen movies. They became one of Hollywood's most famous screen couples, especially when Bronson finally became a household name in the 1970s. Bronson brought the same tough exterior to The Dirty Dozen, which was filmed in England in 1966. It was a star-studded war movie with too many egos for the set to handle, and Bronson didn't make it easier on himself. He kept to himself and often seemed distant. On set, he was called Charlie Sunshine because of his dark mood, but it wasn't just attitude. Problems with the shoot made it take months to finish. One day, his co-star Lee Marvin disappeared. It turned out he had been drinking and had to be dragged back from a nearby pub. He was barely sober for the next scene. It was a mess, but the movie still made millions of dollars and was the biggest hit of 1967. Still, not every memory from that set was a good one. Bronson had always been self-conscious about being 5'8", and that made him feel bad during a group scene when director Robert Aldrich put him between Clint Walker and Donald Sutherland, who were both much taller than him. Everyone saw how embarrassed and angry Bronson was, but Aldrich just laughed. For a man who had spent years making a name for himself as a tough guy, the moment hurt like hell. It wasn't a joke, it hit him where it hurt. Charles Bronson had spent years playing tough guys in the background while prettier actors got the attention. He was in hits like The Magnificent Seven and The Dirty Dozen. But Hollywood wouldn't give him the lead role because his face was too rough and his presence too intense. Studios kept casting the same clean-cut heroes while Bronson waited. By 1968, he was 47 years old and still wasn't a leading man in America, so he packed his bags and went to Europe, just like Clint Eastwood did before him. Europe saw something that Hollywood didn't. They didn't care if he wasn't pretty. They wanted power, grit, and real presence. That's when France called. Landon, one of Europe's biggest stars, asked Bronson to co-star in Adio Lame, and the directors were honest about it. If you want to make a lot of money in Europe, you have to have interesting characters. When that movie came out, French audiences went crazy. It made a lot of money, and Bronson finally got the screen time he deserved. The chemistry between him and Don was raw and riveting, and both critics and audiences agreed. Right after that, fate gave Bronson a second chance. Sergio Leone, the director of The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly, offered Bronson the part of a mysterious gunman playing harmonica in Once Upon a Time in the West. Bronson had turned down Leone's offer for a fistful of dollars, the role that made Eastwood famous years before. Now Leone had his man, and the wait paid off. The movie was a huge hit all over Europe. It played for a whole year in Paris, and Bronson was in movies all over Italy, Germany, and France. Leone even said Bronson was the best actor he had ever worked with because of that long, tense stare and every move he made. Ride on the Rain, a dark French thriller that won a Golden Globe and made Bronson an even bigger legend, came next. Cold Sweat, Violent City, and Red Sun were all hits, and each one was made to fit his serious style. Directors wrote scripts just for him. These weren't just roles, they were shows for everything Hollywood had ignored. It was always the same man, quiet, dangerous, and moral to the core, and people loved it. Women adored him, and men wanted to be like him. When he came back to Hollywood in the early 1970s, he wasn't just another face, he was $1 million man. By 1973, he was making $1 million per movie, which was almost unheard of at the time. Bronson's real journey was just beginning at age 52, when most actors start to fade. British director Michael Winner helped shape some of Bronson's most famous roles. The two worked together on several movies, and it was clear that they were a great match. Winner's taste for gritty violence went well with Bronson's quiet, deadly calm. Chatow's Land was their first project together, and things only got bloodier from there. When they made Death Wish, it wasn't supposed to be so violent. Another director was in the running, but Winter didn't back down from the dark stuff. He pushed the movie to its limits. Bronson, who had always been quiet, became the face of revenge, and people loved it. People went to see it even though critics didn't like how violent it was. But before that, Bronson changed the role of the hitman in The Mechanic. He played a killer who didn't say much but moved very precisely, which was very scary. The movie started with Bronson planning a hit for almost 16 minutes. That performance showed how powerful silence could be. The original script had even darker undertones, like the hitman and his apprentice being openly gay, but the studios cut that out. What was left was still powerful, though. Bronson made cold, calculated murder feel like an art form. He even made sure that his wife Jill Ireland had a part in the movie, as he did in many others. Bronson wasn't just good at one thing. In Chatow's Land, he played a half Apache who gets revenge for his wife's abuse, and in The Stone Killer, he played a tough cop who goes after mafia killers. They were two very different roles, but Bronson made them both feel real. Things didn't always go well off-screen. During one of the stunts, something went so badly wrong that a crew member almost died, and the car rental company got so scared that they tried to take the cars back in the middle of the shoot, which Michael Y. didn't like. But these two movies, The Quiet Avenger and The Brutal Justice Dealer, helped the Bronson brand stick. These roles paved the way for what came next. Then things really changed. By the mid-1970s, Bronson wasn't just a movie star. He was the world's biggest movie star, bigger than Clint Eastwood and Paul Newman combined. While other stars carefully chose their pictures, Bronson didn't. He didn't do interviews or smile for the press. Instead, he made movies and let the silence speak for itself. Death Wish was a huge hit. It made more than 10 times what it cost to make. These movies finally understood that international fame could be more important than domestic press. And Bronson kept doing what he always did, staring down the camera like he had nothing to prove. Bronson could not get rid of the part of Paul Kersey in Death Wish. In that role, he played a quiet architect whose life falls apart when his wife is killed and his daughter is abused. The change was shocking, and the fact that Bronson was already 52 years old made it feel even more real. Many men secretly wished they could be like him, cold, fearless, and unstoppable. But Bronson had limits behind the scenes. He wouldn't let his real wife play the victim on screen. "I don't want her messed around," he told the director. That was Bronson, tough but protective. When Death Wish came out in theaters, it set off a chain of events. America was going crazy from rising crime and lost trust in the government. This rough movie about street justice felt like more than just a movie all of a sudden. Some people didn't like it. They said it was dangerous and racist, but people who saw it couldn't get enough. It became hard to tell the difference between Bronson and the character Paul Kersey. People wanted to buy guns and yelled "Death Wish" when they saw him on the street, as if he were really Paul Kersey. The author of the book that inspired the movie was shocked. He meant it to be a warning, but the public made Bronson their hero. New York streets in the 1970s were dark and scary. There was trash and graffiti everywhere, and people were afraid to walk alone. Then Bronson walked into the picture with his silent stare and hidden pistol. For many, the movie was a reflection of their daily lives. Some neighborhoods even started calling themselves Kersey Patrols. That's how much it affected them. Police started to worry that real people might try to break the law. Bronson was more than just a movie star. He was a symbol. Depending on who you asked, that was either good or bad. But all that fame came with a price. Bronson didn't like being in the spotlight. In interviews, he said he felt like a stretched-out, distorted funhouse mirror version of himself. Fans knew him as a killer, but at home he painted and sculpted. He was a calm man who liked peace. As the Death Wish sequels got more over the top, Bronson pulled back emotionally. For 20 years, from the first game in 1974 to the last one in 1994, Bronson played Kersey. "I just go through the motions," he said. In Death Wish 3, he was killing gangs with machine guns. It didn't feel real anymore, and even Bronson thought it had gone too far. But he kept coming back to the role because money and contracts talked. As the movies went on, the character got crazier. He went from being a broken man with a gun to an urban soldier fighting crack dealers and drug lords. Charles Bronson's love story starts long before he became famous and tough in Hollywood. He met Harriet Tendler, a rich teen from Philadelphia, at an acting school. He only had 4 cents on him on their first date, but Harriet liked how honest and determined he seemed. They got married in 1949, even though her father was worried. She took care of both of them for years while Bronson chased his dream, waiting for a big break that seemed like it would never come. Eventually, it did. His movies like The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape made him famous, but fame came with a cost. Their marriage, which had been based on love and sacrifice, started to fall apart. By the time Bronson was almost famous in 1965, they had split up. Harriet later wrote a book about their time together, not mean but honest. She remembered him as a flawed but loving father, an amazingly skilled painter, and someone who always tried to move forward. Around the same time, a new woman entered Bronson's life in the strangest way. Jill Ireland was visiting her husband, David Masilum, on the set of The Great Escape when Bronson reportedly said something brave. 5 years later, whether he said it or not, he married your wife. Ireland divorced McClum in 1967, and Bronson's divorce was finalized 2 years earlier. In 1968, Bronson and Ireland got married. Instead of causing trouble and being angry, McClum kept his cool and later said he never held a grudge. It was the start of a long and special relationship between Bronson and Ireland that would last 20 years and include more than 12 movies. Their relationship wasn't just about love. It became the basis of Bronson's career from that point on. From 1970 to 1987, he made sure Jill Ireland was in almost every movie he made, a total of 15 movies. They were more than just co-stars, they were partners in every way. Their life together was always on the move, as Bronson's next project took them to different places. But they made it work, raising 7 kids together, 2 from Bronson's side, 3 from Ireland's, and 2 they adopted together. Their main home was in Bear, but they also had a farmhouse in Vermont and a snowy getaway in Colorado. Jill took care of the horses, and Bronson worked hard at his job. Together, they made a life that had nothing to do with the violent movies. Bronson was shy behind the scenes. He was so shy that he couldn't even watch his own movies. On the quiet side, he liked painting and family dinners more than red carpet events. He lived like he still remembered cold dust and hunger, even though he was once the highest-paid actor in the world. Jill once told a story that showed his two sides. When she told Bronson that a director was treating her badly, he calmly walked over and shook the man awake. That fierce loyalty and protective edge was what made him who he was. But what happened next could not be stopped. In 1984, Jill was diagnosed with breast cancer. He had played violent vigilantes on TV and in movies, but now he was helpless next to his wife as she fought cancer for 6 years. She was so brave that she spoke out in public, wrote 2 autobiographies, and even testified in front of Congress. She didn't just survive, she inspired. She died at their Malibu home in 1990. For the rest of his life, Bronson carried her ashes in his walking cane, putting her ashes inside it after she died. She was the most important thing to him, even after all the movies and millions of fans. Then his story took a strange turn that he never asked for. In 1987, a British criminal named Michael Gordon Peterson legally changed his name to Charles Bronson. He did it while he was free for a short time, supposedly to promote boxing. The funny thing is that he had never seen a single Bronson movie, but the name stuck, and Peterson built a whole new terrible reputation around it. For the next few decades, he was known as Britain's most dangerous prisoner. Peterson's life quickly went downhill after he got out of jail. He bought a water pistol, altered it into a fake gun, and made a stranger drive him across town. He then started dating the famous Cray twins, boxed illegally, and even robbed a jewelry store on New Year's Day. He was arrested again 6 days later, but this time he wasn't Michael Peterson. He went by the name Charles Bronson, which came from a Hollywood legend and became a symbol of violence and chaos in the UK prison system. What's most strange is how seriously Peterson took the act. He made a name for himself by being violent, holding hostages, attacking guards, holding protests on rooftops, and even demanding a helicopter and a cup of tea during one siege. After holding an art teacher hostage for 44 hours in 1999, he got a life sentence. He has spent most of his time in prison since then in solitary confinement. He has had many hearings for parole, but he stays locked up. His name will always be linked to someone he never met and never saw on TV. In 2008, the line between these two lives became even less clear. A cheap movie called Bronson came out, with Tom Hardy playing the famous British prisoner. Hardy put on weight for the part, met Peterson in real life, and gave a scary performance that got good reviews. Peterson finally saw the movie years later and loved it, saying that Hardy did a great job of capturing him. For some reason, the movie made things even more confusing. People still mix up the prisoner with the actor, forgetting that one was a movie star and the other was a violent prisoner. Interestingly, Peterson tried to get away from the name that made him famous. In 2014, he said he had changed his name to Charles Salvador in honor of the artist Salvador Dali. He said, "I didn't like him. Bronson was a mean jerk. His plan was to start over." The real Charles Bronson, the actor, stayed quiet through it all, even while he was locked up. He never said anything about the strange identity theft in public. He might not have cared, or because he was such a private person, he might have liked quiet over showiness. No matter how many news stories the British prisoner got, the real Charles Bronson had already made a name for himself with great movies, unwavering loyalty, and a love story that would never end.